Welcome back to The Bulwark Goes to Hollywood. My name is Sonny Bunch. I'm culture editor at The Bulwark. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Bilge Ebiri and Brandon Streisnig. Now, Bilge is a film critic at New York Magazine. He's a longtime writer of Village Voice before that, has written for the Criterion Collection. Brandon, freelance writer. And they have combined for a fantastic project that I think is going to reshape the awards world. We're gonna change things here. It's gonna be wonderful. They have put together a big stunt awards package for New York Magazine, and this is important because, as you know, people who watch the Oscars know, stuntmen, stunt coordinators, they don't get any love. They don't get any love, and that's wrong. And Brandon and Bilge have combined forces to try and change that. Thanks for being on the show today. Can I get you guys to introduce yourself one at a time, just so folks can know who's talking? Bilge, you go first.
Hello, my name is Bilge Ebiri, and I am a film critic for New York Magazine and Vulture.
Brandon.
And I'm Brandon Streisnig, and I'm a freelance critic, most recently with Vulture, but have also written for Fangoria, a few other places too.
Thanks again for being on the show. All right, so let's talk about how this came about. Bilge, I remember a couple years back you wrote a piece for Vulture, basically saying like there is no stunt category in the Oscars. Why don't we have that? Was that kind of the impetus of this whole thing? Was that the starting point?
I think it's fair to say that was the starting point. It's stunt awards. I will say they were not my idea. You would think that they were because I've been kind of beating that drum, but it was my editors came to me and said, "Hey, we'd like to do something like this. What do you think?" And I was obviously very much for it. That original piece, which at this point I think was 2019, 2020, I think it was 2020 or something like that. That was inspired by, well, both the fact that stunt people had been campaigning for an Oscars category, but also just from over the years, having talked to stunt people for interviews and things like that, just slowly realizing just how much incredible work goes into what they do, how entertaining they are. They are, among sort of film people, they are probably my favorite people to talk to, in part because they have no filters, and also they're not media trained in that way that actors and directors and the people who do sort of the press circus every time a movie comes out are. So I've always enjoyed talking to them. I've always enjoyed learning more about what they do, how they do it, and it slowly dawned on me that it was absurd that there wasn't an Oscar for it. And then I learned more about their attempts. I mean, they've been trying for decades to get an Oscar category for stunts, despite the fact that occasionally special awards are given out to stunt people and have been for years. So yeah, it came out of that. And since then, we've been kind of beating this drum repeatedly. And it made sense to just sort of take the next step and just, give out our own awards. And just to, one, as a way of celebrating this stuff, two, because it's fun to do it, and three, because it would, kind of remind people that there isn't an Oscar category for it, which is why we ran it like the week before the Oscars.
And it really is kind of surprising, especially when you think about how, FX and action-driven so much of the film industry is at this point, that there isn't a more formalized way of rewarding stuntmen and the work that they do. Brandon, but part of the issue here, I think, is just looking at the categories that you guys put together. I mean, there are so many different ways to categorize stunts and to reward the different sorts of things that you see on screen that it's almost kind of daunting to figure out how to collapse that down into, one or two categories for the Oscars, right?
Yeah, I think so. And that was something that we did kind of, I wouldn't say struggle with, but it was something that we talked about a lot because it was hard to, narrow down who did what and who, does this go to the stunt coordinator or a cinematographer or even the director in some cases. So that was kind of hard to narrow down. But the one thing that I felt like was very strange that I had never considered until doing this was we got a few responses like when we first were going out to people and trying to get we wanted to get people within the industry to create nominations for our voting body. And we were just going out to anyone who, we could think of, stunt people, directors, things like that. And there were a few people who pushed back and said that they weren't interested because they felt like creating a stunt awards would be creating an arms race for people to get hurt. And that was something I had never considered before. And frankly, I think that's very stupid. I think it's kind of patronizing. But I wonder now if that's one of the reasons the Oscars push back on it, because the more people I've spoken to within the industry, the more that they've told me that that's a big reason that they've heard, that it's not so much about who gets rewarded, but they're afraid that I guess they're afraid that people are going to try to one up each other every single year to get a potential Oscar. And I just think that that's very silly to think, because it's these people are trained in what they do, and I think it's not giving them enough credit. But it's, I don't know, it was a very it was almost a shocking thing to hear, especially like not consistently, but enough to where it was like, oh wow, that I can't believe people actually think like that.
Well, I mean, that could be just as applicable to the world of filmmaking itself. I mean, every year we're talking about, the new Tom Cruise stunt in the next Mission Impossible movie, right? I mean, it's like the idea that there's going to not be one-upmanship, in this world is kind of silly to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've heard that counter argument as well. That was actually something that Jack Gill, the veteran stuntman and stunt coordinator who has been for many years spearheading this attempt to get an Oscars category for stunts. He's a member of the Academy, has been a member for years, and in fact, in my piece, I talk about how it was Sidney Lumet's idea initially to get him into the Academy so that they could sort of start this ball rolling. But he said that he had heard that argument. There have been a couple of arguments about why there shouldn't be a stunt Oscar. The thing about that argument for me is there are already awards for stunts, right? I mean, SAG has a stunt ensemble award that it's given out for years. The Canadian Academy just a couple of years ago introduced a stunt award. There are, I mean, quite aside from the Vulture Stunt Awards, there is actually, a stunt academy, and they give out their awards every year. I think it's in September, and so far there hasn't been some kind of dangerous one-upmanship. But really, the most important thing about it is a stunt coordinator's very first. The most important part of their job is safety, right? I mean, that's the job. I mean, that's why stunt people do these things, so that they can be done safely by professionals. So you'd kind of not be doing your job if you were putting people in constant danger, trying to get an award. But as Brandon says, it's also it's condescending. I mean, it suggests that suddenly like these people are going to see Oscar and just like, they're it's going to be like a cartoon where their eyes light up with like little gold statues and they're just going to go around killing people. I will say this, however, there is, you can say that that's not a valid argument, and I would say it's not a valid argument. But you can also say that that is something that people are worried about perception-wise, so that, for example, let's say there isn't an arms race, but they do introduce this award. The minute somebody is injured on a stunt in a big action movie or whatever, or God forbid killed, you just know there will be a million bozos on Twitter talking about how this caused that, and now they're all rooting for Oscar. I can sort of envision, maybe because of the way I tend to catastrophize, how any news item will play out in social media now, because my brain has just rotted away to that point. But like, that's sort of I can already see how the discourse will take shape if that ever happens. God forbid, hopefully it doesn't happen. But people do get injured. People get injured. I mean, not doing stunts too. But this would provide that context. So it might not be so much that people are worried that stunt people will do this and create create an arms race, quote unquote. But it's might also be that they're worried that this is how it will be perceived. At the same time, I mean, that's a good reason for not doing anything about anything, what the dumbest people on social media or out there in the world might think about it.
Yeah, I mean, that is the stupidity of Twitter is never a good reason not to do something. I mean, there are other good reasons not to do things, but that's for sure. Let's talk about the awards themselves, because I want people to get a sense of the. First off, I want people to go just read this package that you guys put together. I mean, you've got a full day's worth of reading ahead of you. There's all sorts of stuff to check out: interviews with directors, interviews with stuntmen, lists of great stuntmen turned directors. I mean, it's a fantastic package. But let's talk about the actual awards. Could you just run us through the list real quick to give people a sense of what to expect when they go there?
Yeah. I'm gonna pull them up just to make sure I don't forget anything.
Just read the list. That's fine. That's perfect.
Feel bad because it's been 6 months of my life, and you would think I'd have them off the back of my hand, but yeah. So the first one was it was best stunt in an action film. That one kind of speaks for itself, and then there was best stunt in a non-action film, which was kind of like, to me, the most fun category. Even though action's like probably my favorite genre, it was why Bilge approached me to help spearhead this and everything. But the best stunt in a non-action film was a lot of fun because you had everything from like Deep Water to Triangle of Sadness to Jackass all nominated in that. And Nope, which was the eventual winner. And then there was stuff like Best Fight, Best Shootout, Best Vehicular Stunt, Best Practical Explosion, and then Best Overall Action Film, which is essentially our Best Picture. And then Best Achievement in Stunts Overall, which was given to just one stunt professional who had, exhibited the best achievement in stunts for the year. And then we also had a Lifetime Achievement Award, which went to Albert Pune, who passed away last year.
You mentioned, and this is something that you discuss in the piece, coming up with the categories, creating. You had a kind of an advisory committee that helped you come up with the categories. What were some of the surprises there, Brandon? I mean, because it feels like the sort of thing where you envision in your head, like, all right, these are the categories that we should award, and then you start talking to the experts, and they're like, well, what about this? What about this? How did that list change and evolve as you guys were working on it?
Well, one of the biggest things was we had a stunt woman, Angelica Liscon. She was one of the people who I was emailing with back and forth just for suggestions. And one of the biggest things that I had never heard until speaking with her is that apparently the correct term is just stunt professional. It's not stunt people or things like that. So that was something that I hadn't heard before. Not too many surprises within the category, but just talking to the advisory board, we had a VFX artist help us out a little bit. Just hearing how much was actually practical, because there were some things where we were unsure how much of something was CGI, how much of something was practical. And to find out how much, actual practical explosion went into something like the Batman after the chase scene, I was surprised by that, because I thought a lot of that movie was done on sound stages and things like that with, the LED backgrounds and everything. So it wasn't so much shaping the categories that surprised me, because they were kind of, when this was brought to me, it was the categories kind of have always stayed the same from when they were first pitched till now, but just like the little intricacies of it were a little surprising.
Yeah, and in talking to these folks, you really get a sense of just how collaborative the whole thing is. When you talk to someone like Todd Vaziri, the VFX artist who was part of our little advisory board, we talk about movies. We're like, oh, is it too much CGI? It's all, it's all VFX. It's all, it's all done in computers and stuff like that. That's just not true. There's so much practical work goes into this stuff before it becomes, before it goes into the world of VFX and CGI and things like that. I mean, when you look, if you look at kind of the behind the scenes footage from the making of Avatar, yes, it's these digital environments and the characters are, digitally rendered and all that stuff. But like, they're really fighting. Like they're like, it's an actual fight that they shoot. And, there's a lot of stunt work involved. There are actual vehicles they're riding that are then turned into, whatever magic Pandora creature they're going to be riding in the actual movie. There's so much work that goes into this. I mean, I can't remember if it was Todd that said this or someone else, but they made the point because the one of our nominees for best fight, and it didn't win, but had a strong showing. Let's just say was the big melee at the opening of RRR, which was kind of Ram's introduction at the police station with a crowd of thousands or whatever, and a lot of people have looked at that and said, "Oh, this looks like CGI." This person made the point. It took them 35 days to shoot that scene, and when you look at the footage of them shooting it, no, there's a lot of stunt work being done there. I mean, it's an incredibly complicated sequence they're shooting. So all these little things, I mean, they're not little things, they're big things, but, you really gain a newfound appreciation for just how collaborative all this work is, which is also another reason why, a stunt Oscar seems like such a no-brainer to me. Like, it's the right thing to do, right? You give awards to the VFX artists, right? You have a special effects award. It's the other side of that coin. And it's just actually when I did my original, there should be a stunt Oscar piece. One of the stunt professionals I talked to said it is a little weird where we go on set and everybody has kind of their own category and could win an Oscar for their category, but we're the people who are doing all this stuff and we're somehow excluded. In the way that we talk about this stuff sometimes in reviews and things like that, we sort of put these things in opposition to one another, practical stunts versus, CGI. But it's really not that way at all. I mean, they're always working together. One side might lean more and one side might be more dominant than the other for certain movies, but it is really, you kind of have to take a holistic view of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was you mentioned Avatar. One thing that was interesting in one of the sidebars, there was a extended response from somebody who was like, "I can't believe Avatar's not getting more love because they I guess everybody's just kind of blinded by the CGI of it all. That it's it all seems to be FX. But I've watched the making of videos from Avatar. That stuff is insane. It's on both ends. I mean, granted, there is a lot of FX work. I don't think anyone would deny that, but it's interesting to watch them actually perform it live.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by the lack of Avatar love too, and I do think that was the biggest thing, is that the nominating body simply might not have been aware of how much stunt work went into that, and then that gets into the deeper intricacies of it, because to be honest, I think, you hear the stories about how long people had to hold their breath. Is that a stunt? Is that, because that's that's a feat of that's a pretty incredible feat to me. But yeah, Bilga brought up RRR. That was another one that I think people, because we've gotten really great responses to this, but there have been one or two people who have asked, what happened with RRR because it didn't win anything, and that was one of the more popular action movies of the year. And I think it might simply just come down to a lot of people thought that movie was all CGI, and it's not. I mean, they shot for 300 days. I mean, you're not shooting for 300 days and doing it all in post. So I mean, I don't know. It is an interesting thing, and I like what you said, Bilga, about how I think we should stop looking at these things in opposition to one another, of CGI versus practical stunts and everything, because they are just kind of working in tandem together. And it is weird that, if you're going to reward one, why aren't you rewarding the other? And yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that.
One of the movies that was singled out, I don't think it. I can't remember. I don't think it won anything, but is I know one of Bilge's favorite movies of the year, Athena. I mean that opening 10 or 11 minute chase sequence out of the into and then out of the police station is just one of the most fantastic things I've seen on screen all year, and it really kind of highlights the breadth of this category. I mean, you have everything from Avatar 2, which costs, God only knows how many GDPs of how many small countries. And then you've got Athena, and then you've got, Ambulance, which is kind of closer to the Athena range, ironically. I mean, I am, when you guys were watching the results come in, what were you excited to see get more love than you thought maybe was going to?
I will say the love for Athena warmed my heart. Oddly enough, despite getting an invite to vote, both for the nominations and for the winners, in both cases, I did not get my ballot in on time. So none of those things that people said about Athena were me. Let me just say, and. I don't think there was any category where something won by one vote, so I don't think my ballot would have ultimately made that big a difference. But I was very happy to see other people standing for that film for once. But yeah, I mean, and that film though, I mean, one, not a lot of people saw it because it was not marketed well. It's on Netflix, but it was, when you do see it. Even if you don't love the movie, and it can be controversial, the film, the amount of work that they clearly did, the real life stunt work that they're doing in that movie is staggering. And if there is also, on Netflix, there's actually a making of, like a 35 minute making of that you can watch, where you see them doing some of this stuff, and I still have a hard time wrapping my head around it. I mean, there's, Sonny, you mentioned the opening sequence. The opening sequence is like an unbroken 11-minute long take. Now, there is some digital stitching happening between certain sections of it, but the stunts you're seeing are being done. And there's a scene where these kids who've just like raided a police station, they've commandeered a van, and they're riding in the van, and there's a camera. The camera goes into the van, goes out of the van, circles the van, goes back into the van, and then circles back out, I believe. Or no, actually, then stays inside. But it goes in and out twice. And that was not done digitally. What you see in the making of that was a cameraman strapped to a motorcycle driving alongside the van, handing this enormous digital IMAX camera to another cameraman who was inside the van, who then shoots them and then hands it back, and then they circle. I mean, it's just insane. You see it being done, and you still can't quite, accept it. So it's stuff like that. I mean, a film like that, I always felt if enough people saw that movie, that would have an impact in a stunt awards race such as this, because it is so impressive what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, it is, like you said, it does sort of show the breadth of work being done. I mean, you have a Top Gun Maverick, you have an Avatar, which are two very different types of movies, obviously both very expensive blockbusters. But then you have an Ambulance, you have an Athena, you have something like The Woman King. I mean, these are all films that are, their sensibilities are different, but also the type of stunt work going into them is different. I mean, it gives you a sense of how diverse this world is.
What was exciting for me was seeing the love for Scott Adkins. His movie winning Best Fight, and then he won Stunt Professional of the Year. He's someone who I've really followed for years, and who I've been like kind of championing for years, wondering why hasn't this guy gotten a bigger break? When he shows up in Hollywood movies, he's like goon number 2, but then in these DTV movies that you find at Walmart. He's the star, and they're like secretly incredible movies. And so to see him finally get some love and actually win was pretty incredible to me. It kind of made, like, this project on its own was very fulfilling, but that made it all worth it for me to see just him get some love after all these years.
Let's hit on this for a second, because I do think I saw you on Twitter, and you could tell that this was the thing that you were most excited about, probably from this awards cycle is Scott Adkins winning. Now, like I'm guessing most people who listen to this don't have any idea who Scott Adkins is, and this is you're missing out, folks. You're missing out. But why don't you run us through his filmography, Brandon? Give people what is, like, if you had two movies that people should check out from Scott Adkins to get them on the Adkins diet. What are we looking for?
I would probably say, that's so tough because there's so many, but definitely Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning is probably like the one that I think anyone should see, whether you're an action fan or not, because it's just so ambitious, so unlike anything I've ever seen. And then you think, like, this is like the fourth Universal Soldier movie. How good can it be? And it's like way better than you ever think it would be. And then I would probably say the other one would be probably Undisputed 3, which, again, you would have to see Undisputed 2 for it to make sense. Maybe Undisputed 1, but not really. But Undisputed 3 kind of shows just exactly what he can do as a martial artist. He's been referred to by a lot of different people as like a human special effect, because it kind of like breaks your brain seeing what he can do. And because he's like, when you think of martial artists, you think of like really agile, like smaller guys for the most part. And he is very agile, but he's also like just huge. Like, he's just like a giant guy, and he's like flying through the air doing these insane kicks that a guy like his size shouldn't be doing. So I don't know. I think Undisputed 3 probably shows that off the best, but Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning is probably his best film. So I would go with those two.
I will say my favorite Scott Adkins moment from recent years is in the movie Day Shift.
Yes.
I don't know if you guys saw that, but Day Shift is fine. It's like I didn't love it. It's a little mediocre, but there's this moment about midway through where Scott Adkins shows up with another guy, and they're like Hungarian or something, Hungarian vampire killers, and the action sequence they put together is like, oh, this is what the whole movie should have been. The whole movie should have been this sequence here, and that's how I feel basically anytime he shows up in any Hollywood thing. But as you mentioned, I mean, there's a whole DTV universe of his stuff that people should check out. I don't know. I think I guess mainstream audiences are probably going to get a lot of him in John Wick 4, right? He's one of the main villains in that. If I haven't seen it yet, I don't know.
Yeah, I think he's in John Wick 4. I haven't seen it either, but he's also one of the bad guys in The Expendables. Was it the first Expendables? I can't remember, but like one of the Expendables movies. I mean, Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning was the movie where I became aware of who he was, even though I had seen him in other films. There's something, I think, I don't know if ironic is the word. I'm probably using the word ironic wrong here, but the fact that he is kind of the king of like the DTV streaming action movie. When I finally watched Accident Man: Hitman's Holiday, which is the film that one of the films that he did in 2022 that also won our Best Fight Sequence award. The thing I was struck by was, oh my God, this would kill in a movie theater. Like the irony of it is that, we're sort of stuck watching these things at home. I'm sitting here in my basement watching it, on nice TV and everything. But as I was watching it, oh my God, if I could transport myself back in time to a hypothetical packed audience watching this movie, I would so love to do that, because it just, your lizard brain just completely takes over watching one of these films, because the things they're doing are so nuts, and the stunts they're performing are so incredible. Not just Scott Adkins, but Andy Long and all the other people involved in this film. it's there to be appreciated by a group of people just sort of roaring in orgasmic rage and delight. A movie like that, you don't really have much of a chance to see in theaters, because that's kind of actually where it really belongs. Like, it's a spectacle. It's like, it's like wrestling. It's like watching wrestling, like, who wants to watch wrestling by themselves at home? I mean, I'm sure a lot of us do, but that just seems sad to me,
Do you guys think that the John Wick phenomenon has kind of changed that at all, or is it still? I feel like these things are starting to break through to the mainstream a little more. The whole gun fu, kind of over the top stylized action that you see in things like Bullet Train, or kind of on a more subdued, more realistic level with Atomic Blonde. I feel like that sort of thing is kind of hitting the mainstream a little more frequently now.
I think so, for sure, and that was something. A big reason why I'm constantly on Twitter going on and on about action, particularly DTV, is that for years, until probably John Wick and then the Mission Impossible movies, the later ones, for years it felt like the only action we were getting was in like Marvel movies, and it was like pretty poor action at that. And I was getting frustrated because I was like, you guys, like, the best action is not happening in theaters, and you guys are missing it. And I think with John Wick, it's coming from two guys who kind of came up in the stunt world, and like Stahelski started in DTV. He was working on a whole bunch of Albert Pune movies when he got his start. And I think he's someone that's been able to take like that kind of like the action that I had been seeing for years in DTV movies and bringing it to a theatrical setting. And so much so that as the John Wick movies have gone along, he's starting to include a lot of these guys who have, cut their teeth in movies no one's seeing for years. Like this latest one does have Scott Adkins. He's actually in a fat suit in this movie. So, you talk about Twitter discourse. That's going to be a lot of fun when the movie actually comes out. But, and then another big part of the newest John Wick, I haven't seen it either, but is Marco Zaror, who he's the villain in Undisputed 3. And he's a guy that has been killing it in DTV, just not seen by wider audiences. So I do think the John Wick movies have kind of changed that for the better, to the point where I don't think John Wick is responsible for this exactly, but I think this was a great year to do these awards, because I think that 2022 was a pretty high watermark for just theatrical action that we've had in the last few years. I mean, I know, Bilge, you interviewed Kaczynski, and he said he doesn't view Top Gun as an action movie. And I mean, with all due respect, I kind of disagree with that. I don't know if John Wick is directly responsible for that, but I do think we might start seeing different kinds of action in theaters finally, after, being dominated by superheroes.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of factors. I think John Wick is definitely one of them. I mean, Stahelski met Keanu Reeves first when he was his stunt double on The Matrix, and Keanu Reeves is one of those people who has highlighted the work of his stunt team. He spends a lot of time with them. I'm told on sets in films, they basically like stay together and hang out together and stuff like that. And part of that is just because of the nature of the work that they have to do. They have to work together a lot. But, it helps to have actors highlighting this work. Even somebody like Tom Cruise, right? Because the thing people always say, oh, Tom Cruise is always doing his own stunts, blah blah blah, and he is. But when you look at for example, that little video doc that came out about them performing that insane stunt for the next Mission Impossible film, where he's riding a motorcycle off a ramp into a cliff and then turning it into a base jump with a parachute. Those, when he does stuff like that, you see him working closely with his stunt coordinator. So maybe it's not that he's necessarily, there's a ton of stuff about Tom Cruise's stunt double, although I'm sure he has one. It's not that he doesn't have one, but there is a lot of, you see how much work goes into these things. And that's another way that this type of work gets mainstreamed, and people are able to sort of understand how much work goes into it, appreciate because once you see the work that goes into it, then you can also appreciate the art of it, right? Because people aren't just doing it just to do it. They're trying to do it in the way, in the most compelling, interesting, artful, beautiful way possible. And the success of films like RRR will also help in that regard. So over the years, I think there has been a lot more attention put on this world, and as Brandon said, some of it also has to do with the fact that action has become, action has kind of taken over Hollywood, right? I mean, action movies were always popular, obviously, but it has kind of become, I think, increasingly not just a thing movies do to make money, but a thing that brings movies prestige. I mean, the fact that we have among this year's Best Picture Oscar nominees, we have Avatar, we have Top Gun Maverick, we have Everything Everywhere All at Once. And, hanging out in the sidelines were a number of movies that were also action-oriented, like The Woman King or The Northman, films that a lot of people felt should have been nominated but weren't. And I think that speaks to the fact that once upon a time, it was seen as kind of a wild occurrence when an action film was nominated for Best Picture. Now it seems to happen more and more.
One thing Kaczynski said to you, he in the interview you did with him, he says I don't really see these as action movies. The action is telling part of the story. But that's kind of the running thread through all of these movies. The action scenes in all of these movies are not just standalone showy set pieces. I mean, they are sometimes, sure. but they're telling stories. I mean, this is an integral part of the storytelling of the film itself, which is a really kind of, I think it's an interesting way to look at these movies, but also just again reinforces the fact that these sequences need greater recognition from their peers and critics and everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think I understood what he meant by that when he said that he didn't really think of it as an action movie. I think because as the director, he kind of can't think of it as an action movie. I mean, it's his job, if you will, to sort of make sure that there's an emotional through line to the film, that the characters make sense, that their motivations and their reactions and their emotions are always foregrounded. I think if a filmmaker starts to see something as just an action movie, then they stop being able to do the thing that will make it a great action movie, right? Because then they'll just think of it as sequences, as just big action sequences, and they'll just go for whatever is the most gonzo thing they can, and we'll kind of lose track of the story, we'll lose track of the characters, we'll lose track of the emotions. I actually recently interviewed John Woo for a piece that will run later, but that's also how he always approached it. There's actually something somebody once said about Face Off, which was they were actually talking about why this isn't what John Woo said, but this was actually, I think maybe the writer of the original Face Off was talking about why he was so alarmed by discussions of a Face Off sequel, which wouldn't involve John Woo, but he said that they keep talking about all the crazy action sequences they're going to have in it, and John Woo never talked to me about the action sequences. John Woo always talked to me about the characters, about the emotions, about sort of what was happening in the story, and what was going to be the most interesting, exciting, emotional thing for the viewer to watch. It was never about, oh my God, now we're going to have the boats doing this stuff. So I think a director, the person who has to sort of keep track of the whole thing and to help really make it work for an audience as a cinematic experience from beginning to end, they almost can't think of it as an action movie, So that's I think where Kaczynski was coming from, because I mean, all he's made are action movies if you look at it, right? But he can't think of it that way. Like, he's the one person who can't see it that way, because otherwise the whole project will collapse. And I think that's probably true of a lot of filmmakers. And I thank God that that's how they think of it, because again, something like Avatar, something like Top Gun Maverick, something like The Woman King. These films work because the directors are keeping an eye on sort of everything underneath the action, but they're also making sure to create the most exciting action sequences they can.
Just to add on to that, I think a lot of people forget too that when you see a crazy scene in an action movie, you immediately attribute that to the director, and you think, oh well, that director came up with that. That was awesome. But I think a big reason why something like the Stunt Awards are important is because it kind of goes into what Bilgo was saying, is with someone like Scott Adkins, for example, he kind of when you see like a crazy fight or a crazy action scene involving him, 9 times out of 10, he's come up with that like in conjunction with the director. He's created that himself, and I think that it's kind of important to be able to recognize that it's not all the director doing these sort of things. And so I liked hearing that perspective, Bilga, because when you see something like Top Gun, a lot of people maybe not Top Gun, because I think a lot of that authorship goes to Tom Cruise, but like, I don't know, something like something like Avatar or something, it all goes to James Cameron. Oh, he came up with all these crazy ideas and everything, but you never know like who on set was responsible for something that you loved that looked amazing. And I think it's important to be able to make those distinctions and everything and realize it's not just the director, because like you said, John Woo gets attributed for all these incredible scenes throughout, cinema history, going all the way back to Hard Boiled and The Killer and everything. But it's nice to hear, that he wasn't even talking about the action with people, because he has so much else on his mind that, you forget that there's hundreds of other people helping to bring this together.
One director you did single out, Albert Pune. Brandon, he wins the Lifetime Achievement Award. Could you was that a category that people were voted on, or did you just pick that? How did that work?
Well, that's what's interesting is I've kind of been joking to people that the Pune Lifetime Award and the fact that Ambulance didn't win anything proves that I didn't rig any of this, because the Ambulance was my favorite movie last year, and Pune is like one of like the directors who means the most to me. But when this was pitched to me, it was pitched to me as, would you like to write about him as the Lifetime Achievement winner? So the whole Stunt Award idea months and months ago was brought to me with him having pretty much already been decided as the winner of that award. So no one voted on that. That was something that was separate. And I think it was done a little bit, it was, unfortunately it was done after his passing, but I think it was just something that, he's been reevaluated in recent years. I think a lot of people still view him as like, if they do know him at all, they might, know him as like the Captain America director, the movie that, no one really saw, but it's like pretty terrible, but has, a lot of fun. But I think over the years, there's been like a small corner of Twitter that, calls itself Action Twitter, that intermittently will share like a clip. I'm one of them that'll share like clips from Nemesis or something like that, where it's just like, someone falling off a building on fire, and it's like, you can tell it was made for like $10, and you're like, how does this look this good? How did they do this? And so I think it was fun to it's been fun over the last year or two to go back, look at his work, and realize that there's kind of a through line with him in the last like 30, 40 years almost, where it's like he was quietly putting together like this amazing body of work with, these really great martial artists, really great stunt professionals and everything. And no one was really ever talking about it until recently that I saw it. If they were talking about it, it was at like a midnight movie showing where people would go to laugh at it or something like that. And so, yeah, he was kind of pitched to me as the winner already. And I was excited about it because I think my editor, I think she knew how much I liked him, and that's why it was pitched to me as that. So it's kind of an off-the-wall choice for Lifetime Achievement winner, because you could have gone with anyone with that. You could have gone like Michelle Yeoh, Tom Cruise, something like that. Gone like bigger, a bigger eye-catching name and everything. But I thought it was really kind of important to honor somebody like him for this first go-around, because I think he embodies the whole spirit of the awards as someone behind the scenes doing this incredible work that doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah, totally. All right. That was everything I wanted to ask you guys. I always like to close these interviews by asking if there's anything I should have asked. What should folks know about either the lack of recognition in broader Hollywood, your guys' awards? What do you want to see from this? Whatever. What should folks know?
I think I would say that in terms of what I would like people to know, we talked earlier about sort of some of the reasons people have given about why there isn't a stunts Oscar, and because it is kind of, I mean, it tends to be mysterious. They never actually explain why. They keep knocking the idea down. But when we talked about how people are worried that stunts are going to become too dangerous if there's an award for it, I just wanted to add one more thing, which is stunts, if anything, have gotten safer over the years, right? I mean, it used to be people were dying all the time, not all the time, but the rate of fatalities and serious injuries and things like that back in the day was so much worse. And it's really, I mean, stunts have gotten so much safer over the years. They've gotten, even as they've become more sophisticated, the equipment being used, the techniques being used have become safer. So that's, I want to make sure to emphasize that. Like, people are becoming more aware of them. They're being awarded more and more. They are maybe becoming more spectacular in terms of what you see on screen, but they're also becoming safer, and that's important because, like I said, that's honestly, stunt professionals and stunt coordinators, that's their number one job, is safety. So just want to re-emphasize that idea. As far as the stunt awards, I will say, and I think it was a ruthlessly democratic process, and one of the things though that we do want to do is try and expand our academy even more. We had a few months to put this together. A lot of it involved, poor Brandon hunting down various publicists and contact information and asking other people to put him in touch with people and stuff like that. Now we have a really nice kind of group to work with, but we also want to expand it because it's a huge industry, and we'd really love for more and more people, not just stunt professionals. Obviously, we want more stunt professionals to vote in it, but more filmmakers and more writers and critics who specialize in this world and have a lot of thoughts about it. So we intend to continue it, but we also want to make sure that we grow it.
Similar to that, I'd love to see this continue to happen every year. And I would, hopefully now that it's out there, I've been seeing such a good response, different stunt people that I follow, stunt professionals that I follow on Instagram and Twitter and everything, we're sharing it all over the place, talking about how cool this was, independent of just even me sending it to them. So it was nice to see it get around a little bit. So I would like to see more of a turnout, more of a wider range of people voting. That way, when someone's favorite doesn't make the list, we can we can emphasize that, like Bilge said, it was very democratic. But I also hope that it leads to people taking action more seriously. And I'm not going to pretend like action's like an underdog of a genre. It dominates box offices and everything. But I do think that there's still a mindset of a certain kind of film person who will, say, oh, that was a good, fun movie, but it's not an Oscar movie. And I think that I hope that as, I feel like that started to wind down a little bit, when Mad Max was nominated for Best Picture, and it's slowly eroding a little bit. But I think in, the last 20 years, we keep hearing about like elevated horror and prestige horror. I don't want to hear that for action, but I do hope that it keeps being taken as seriously as horror has become taken seriously. And I hope that, we were maybe a small part of that somehow.
Fingers crossed. All right, Bilge, Brandon, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Again, you guys should go. Everyone who's listening should go check out the package they put together. It's really it is impressive and in depth, and entertaining as hell. I mean, this is the other thing that you guys mentioned, is that just like the Oscars themselves would be more fun if they had clips of stunts kind of interspersed. Maybe they could do live stunts on the show. I don't know. They could just do something that would make things a little more entertaining. I think folks would love it. But it is in and of itself an art form worth celebrating and praising. So anyway, I'm Sonny Bunch. I'm culture editor at the Bulwark, and I will be back next week with another episode. We'll see you guys then.
If you miss Bob and Tom in the morning, don't worry, because you can catch the Bob and Tom podcast all day whenever you want.
I mentioned that when I was a kid, I went to something called the Grotto Circus. I bought a chameleon from a guy walking up and down the aisles like he would have a tray full of beers, and you scoffed at that. I got this from Greg. My grandparents would take me and my brothers to the Shriner Circus selling chameleons. This would have been in the early 70s. I think the days of the boxed chameleon probably over.
Yeah.
The Bob and Tom Show podcast, wherever you listen.